Welcome to Under the Microscope. I am your host, Jenny Germano. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I am excited for this next topic. We are going to be talking about the hidden cost of operating without QMS systems in cannabis facilities. And before I dive in, just to share a little bit about my background, I began my career in the cannabis industry in 2009, running and operating vertically integrated cannabis operations. And in 2015, I founded my company, 𝗖𝗍𝘀𝗃 Consulting, and I have been helping operators navigate the regulatory landscape across the United States for the last 11 years. And with that being said, let's welcome my next guest. For those who follow the podcast, Alex is no stranger. I'm not even sure how many times Alex has been on my podcast, but we love when Alex shows up. So please welcome Alex Hding. And Alex is the president and founder of Red Wolf Risk. Welcome, Alex.
Well, thank you, Jenny. Always a pleasure to be here discussing some fun cannabis topic with you.
I love it. I feel like every other month I'm like, Alex, come on the podcast. What do you want to talk about? And then we spend some time working on a topic. And I think this is an important topic. But before we start diving in, just remind people, in case they have not heard you before, your background and when you got into the cannabis industry.
Yeah, so prior to the legal cannabis industry, I have a background in science and engineering, hydrology, soil science, big background in worker safety. I got involved right in the early days, 2009, was a caregiver for 4 or 5 years for patients out here in the Colorado State medical market. And then when the recreational or adult use market came along, I got one of the first licenses, and I've helped design, build, and operate all the types of facilities there are out there, and have been consulting and have leaned into risk management and quality management as of late, and just a general cannabis nerd overall.
That's why I like you. And Alex and I work together on a lot of projects. We do a lot of collaboration and we enjoy nerding out on all things compliance and operations. I think this is a really good topic. We work nationally and we're actually in the process of emerging to the global market as well. And we're seeing this push for quality management systems. And I think for some operators, especially maybe smaller, who might not understand a quality management systems or this QMS piece, it can be woven into the regulations and they technically wouldn't use the word QMS. But if you really look through everyone's rules and regulations across the United States, you can see how it's sprinkled naturally into the rules and regulations. And I don't even think people realize they're already doing it as part of having to follow the rules and regulations. So first, let's explain what QMS really is. I think people automatically think, oh, QMS is all about paperwork and compliance, but it's actually more than that. And how do you explain QMS to a cannabis operator in a way that actually makes sense operationally, not just all the paperwork?
Yeah, and I think you are as well. I'm a systems person here, right? And so that's what it is. It's a system that involves other smaller systems, right? So it's a system of other systems. And this main purpose here is to create consistency of your product and your deliverables, and to minimize deviations and variations of that product and services. And the way I see it is almost and this is a biased view of mine, is because I come from a risk management point of view. It's almost the same. It's the other side of the coin of risk management as well, which means defensibility, right? Where if something goes wrong, and I always, when I work with business, I'm always preparing for worst case scenario. And what do you do if and when you're in front of a judge? And you can use all of that paperwork and these systems to say, Your Honor, I did what I could to prevent the employee or consumer from getting hurt, and these are all the things that I did to prevent that. So the way I like to describe it is, these are the systems you need to have to be an industry leader, to move your maturity because we've seen this industry go from where it started to where it is now. And we've seen a lot of maturation go on through that time. But this is the next step up for these businesses. And every industry, to be honest with you, has QMS, quality management systems, to some degree. And there's international standards we'll go into that are basic good practices for business. And the way I describe, and there's the big international standards, ISO 9001 is the big universal quality management system standards. And they have it's called Plan, Do, Check, Act, right? So when you have a business, you want to plan out what you're going to do. You want to execute that plan, and then you check what you did, and then you check the results, and then you adjust to continuously improve your business. So it's this continuous improvement cycle: planning, doing, checking, and acting.
I think the first thing that came to my mind when you explained that is it's an accountability system, really.
Absolutely.
And obviously the rules and regulations, those are our bumpers to be accountable in the cannabis industry and the rules that we have to follow. And of course, the regulators, they come in and you get inspections and they check on you and they're holding you accountable.
Yes.
But this is the way of the operator holding themselves accountable, right? This is internal accountability. This is not all these outside people telling me what I'm supposed to be doing and holding me accountable. This is really self-accountability for your business.
Self-regulation is the way. As another, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's another way that I present this, and I know a lot of people out there listening are probably fans of limited government and limited regulation, and to a large degree, I am as well. But
so am I, and I'm in compliance, but I'm also
right
regulation as well.
Right. I think when you regulate a business, there needs to be a light touch to it, but that requires the business and operator to regulate themselves to a large degree. And that's what that's what QMS is about. It is self-regulation, that you are checking your own systems and you're continuously updating and improving based on feedback from input from inspections of the actual process to consumer complaints. And that's another way. That's a big shift when you actually implement QMS, is really shifting your view. How do we do this to what is the consumer receiving and how are they receiving it and what's their input? So really customer feedback and surveys, this is where it becomes critical to understand, okay, what am I delivering and how am I delivering and how is it being received? But to your point, it is really about self-regulation and making sure you're doing it the right way.
So do you think brands out there do something similar, like outside the cannabis industry? Tyson Foods or Coca-Cola?
100%.
I know I'm listing really big corporations.
Well, it is a good point. And what I like to explain too is a lot of people get hung up on the word quality, right? And so you get to, it doesn't mean it's the best, like, of all the products that are out there. It's every business that gets to define what their quality is, right? And so you basically qualify everything in your business. What is our threshold of acceptability? And what I like to explain to people that have a hard time with that is McDonald's has a QMS system, just like any of those Michelin star restaurants, right? The Michelin star restaurants are going to be, by most people's count, have a much higher quality food and business than the McDonald's. But McDonald's does a really good job of consistency and delivering the level of product that most people are accustomed to. And so that's what the QMS, it touches all businesses, all industries, all levels of quote unquote quality within those industries.
Is really good examples. I think it's also always helpful to look outside the cannabis industry for examples, so it doesn't feel like the cannabis industry is always targeted, where everyone thinks we're so overregulated and why do we have to do all these things, where in reality, we're actually really not doing as much as other industries are actually regulated to do, and that the future of cannabis is still going to be more regulation. But I think it's going to come to a point to where one day operators will be self-regulating themselves with QMS, just like other normal industries, gas and oil or healthcare or food manufacturing. If you look at food manufacturers all across North America, they have the lean manufacturing compliance. What do they call that? The Sigma.
Six Sigma. And that
Six Sigma
ties into all of that lean manufacturing because it's about inspection of that process.
Yeah.
The receiving the inputs, the in-process inspections, the final inspection. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
big
what
one.
we're talking about today, it's not anything new or something that the cannabis industry is making up. This is something that's been happening in the United States for a very long time. And it really is, I believe, going to be the future of the cannabis industry. 20 years from now, even 10 years from now, the cannabis industry is not going to be the cannabis industry that Alex and I will be considered legacy. And the legacy market will soon be a distant memory. And the whole entire cannabis industry is completely look different in the United States 10 to 20 years from now. This is the future of where it's heading. Let's talk about why cannabis is vulnerable right now without
Okay.
QMS, if you wouldn't mind. Like, what makes cannabis businesses more exposed to risk compared to other industries, since we were just talking about other industries, that they don't have this structured QMS system in place?
Yeah, yes, great question. There's a lot of answers. So one of the big pieces is that these businesses still have very fragmented systems, right? There's not like a cohesive kind of operating system that have clear standards for operators. And that means they have very fragmented systems of compliance and document systems. And so there's a lot of silos, right? And that creates confusion and really what they call it opacity, right? A lack of transparency to actually understand what is happening at the operational level, right? The people day to day, yeah, they understand what they're doing, but what's happening is that doesn't translate all the way up to the top, to the owners, to the investors, to the regulators, to the insurers. What happens is a lot of people are just guessing that people are doing the right things,
Mm.
and that creates gaps for potential regulatory violations, product safety issues, and again, just inconsistency in these operations. And it can translate to higher insurance premiums and really more costly financing as well. Because what happens when financiers or insurers come in and they don't understand something, they fill that in with premiums or higher financing rates. So it's more costly, there's higher risk, and there is a lot of exposure operationally.
Yeah, I feel like even with all the regulations at the state level and the local level, they're really just scratching the surface. I feel like there's so much getting left on the table, and it's not the fault of the state or the local municipalities either. It's because of the silos. And what's fascinating is I wrote down silos. Before you said it, I was like, oh, we're in a silo. And because we're a Schedule 1 drug right now in the United States.
As recording now, yeah.
As of today is 421, and happy 420, everyone. Hope
Yes.
everyone had a good 420 yesterday. But we are siloed, which basically means it's patchwork. We're all put in different silos. We're pitted against hemp. Instead of regulating us all like one plant for the uses of the plant, which I really hope that's where this is heading, and instead of putting us all in these little silos, I think that's the challenge, right? I think that's the challenge everyone's up against. It's not only hurting how the states regulate all the operators in cannabis and hemp, but it's hurting the accountability issue. It's hurting people being on one standard QMS system across the United States. Some states don't have QMS as heavily as other states. Some states don't have it at all. Just look, cannabis testing is a great example. It's all over the board across the United States. It's a hot mess. And there's places where the testing facilities, they're getting shut down, they're getting their licenses revoked, they're not doing things properly, or we see all these recalls going on across the country. And I think the reason that this is all happening is because we are so siloed.
Yeah, I sympathize with the rule makers in this because they don't know what they don't know. But that being said, they've really, I think, missed the ball. They missed the plot on this, right?
Yeah.
Where, like to your point earlier, that there are a lot of key components in QMS that are regulated, like inventory, right? Inventory is a big piece. You want traceability is a big piece of this. And they clearly set that up with all of the track and trace systems and metric across the country. but they missed out on a lot of the other pieces to really help these businesses. And I think if they would have understood the value of quality management earlier on, I think a lot of these components would be more understood and utilized right now. But right now,
Yeah.
they're following the rules that they have, and there's still a ways to go to make this better for
And I would also say with the inventory and track and trace across the United States, I think one of the issues that we're seeing is inversion
them.
of illicit products such as intoxicating hemp. A lot of the mature states, Colorado, some of these other states, they have banned intoxicating hemp, which is the different deltas that are out there. Where in Colorado, you can do CBD, but you can't do intoxicating hemp. And because hemp, the material, is a lot cheaper to source, we're seeing inversion where people are finding loopholes and finding ways to get this product inverted into the metric system or the seed-to-sale tracking system across the United States. And so it's not bulletproof whatsoever. And it's happening all across the country, the inversion issue going on right now. And once again, I think this has to do with siloing everyone and pitting everyone against each other between hemp and cannabis, where we should be regulating the uses. And do those uses have CGMP that need to be applied and quality management systems and ISO? Like a lot of the testing facilities, they have to take, I think, the ISO 17025
Yeah.
that they have to get before they can open their testing facility. And with the ISO 9001, it's just going to be interesting where it's heading. And because of this is where the cost, like this hidden cost
Yeah.
of having these poor systems in place. So, what are the real world consequences when a business lacks this proper QMS?
This is pretty broad. There could be a lot of consequences, right? Because if you don't have the proper QMS, it means that you, one, don't have the proper documentation that you need, the document control, managing versions of your processes, understanding what you're doing. So again, what happens is you have essentially a black box, they call it, right? And you don't know what's necessarily going on, right? You're making a lot of assumptions that the operators themselves are following the proper standards, you're following the proper rules. And so what could happen is significant product failure, right? There could be contamination, could be to recalls, could be adverse effects, could lead to significant claims, have insurance claims denied. There could be property exposures like fires, explosions, and obviously profits can be dramatically affected. And I think one of the things that I think it's a fallacy that's out there is that compliance and risk management and quality management is a cost stake, right? Where you're losing money
Yeah.
on paying for these systems. But the reality is what is happening when you implement these systems, you're creating more efficiency and you're preventing a lot of bad things from happening. The cost of inefficient businesses, that's in your bottom line. That's going to affect your margins. And then also there's serious violations that you can get. And that if you don't have your systems buttoned up, you're exposed to breaking whatever type of rule there is out there.
I think if they cannot actually see it instantly, it's almost like a waste of money. And it's really a long game. Compliance is a long game. There's so many things that compliance do for your business. Like, one, you're increasing the value of your business because everybody obviously wants to sell and get out of their business. But investing in compliance and getting all these systems in place, you're preparing for the future in compliance and increasing the value of your business, just like you would do that for your house. If you redid your kitchen or you put in a pool or redid all the plumbing's not something that you can see, or electrical or things that are behind the walls. It's not like design where you can see the design right away of a new kitchen and you see these things that are hidden behind the wall. Compliance can be essentially the same way, but it really is something important to tackle, even if you're a small business. How does it differ between there's MSOs, which are multi state operators? They're single state operators, but sometimes they might have 10 licenses in one state. And then you have a micro business or social equity business where they're a lot smaller, they have a lot less capital, but they still are under the same scrutiny as the standard commercial operators. And then you have mom and pop shops, right? And it seems like it's a burden for everyone depending on where they're at. And how can they approach it if they are a smaller business?
That's a good question. And your points are extremely valid. This is foundational stuff, right? Something you might not, like you said, right?
Yeah.
You might be behind the walls or under the floor here. But you know, what I've found with QMS, really the starting point is document control. And this is like the least sexy of all the systems in cannabis. I know people roll their eyes at this, but yeah, every single business that I've worked with in cannabis, which is dozens, if not over 100 or so businesses now, is that the document system's abysmal. And what they do is they have shared documents. So they have Google or whatever SharePoint, and that's how they share it out. But what they're not doing is they're not tracking what these documents are. And so you really, what you got to start off with, they call it a master document index. You have to document all your manuals, policies, procedures, records, the templates of the records that you're keeping. And you have to basically say, this is when we accepted this document. And if you ever change it, you have to track, okay, we added this, like a new rule came in. And so, you know, what version it is,
Version control,
version
baby.
control, paint control, where it's coming. And so just that's the foundation of stuff. Even these small businesses, they really need that. And they need a system of who's in control. What I like to do is create like a quality team and who gets to sign off on new documents, who gets to approve this, and have a very clear process of, okay, this is how we draft and create the document. And this is this is the approver. It can be multiple people, could be the CEO, could be department head, whomever, but there needs to be a very clear structure, right? So starting out with document control, that would be my biggest advice. It does come down to a lot of paperwork, right? And it is established. And once you have the document control, then you can understand, okay, this is how we track all these things, right? And you can have the records associated with that. Another big piece that businesses should start with is equipment maintenance, right? You have to maintain your equipment in the right way through the manufacturer guidelines. Do you have a record keeping system? Do you have a system where these people are actually recording what they're doing and validating that they are meeting these manufacturer guidelines? You can start off small, and I say small, but this is work, right? You are putting energy into it. And even though it seems it's not hard, but it adds a potential layer of what people see as busy work. But the way I see it, again, this is busy work. This is defensibility. This is transparency. This is what operators, owners, insurers, and regulators want to see. So what I think is the biggest shift, especially for these small operators, is going from a world where the biggest risk was getting caught doing what they're doing from the illegal world, the gray market, into a world that now this is fully legitimate and you have to document everything. And sometimes it's a mindset shift from where they were operating to now this new world. And you're only going to protect yourself and improve your business better with the more documentation you create.
Yeah. I can almost feel that a small operator would be overwhelmed by everything that you're saying, because where do they have the time? As we know, the cannabis industry, it is drinking through a fire hose. And once you're operational, you're putting out fires. A lot of times operators, owners struggle to work on the business. They're now in the business, right? Before they were launching and getting licensed, that was working on the business. Once they open, they're working in the business and they spend less time working on the business. And it is busy work. It is a lot of getting the document pieces organized. And what I find with all the audits, like the last 11 years, I don't even know, hundreds of facilities I've audited, the document management and document control is really lacking. It really is an issue. And particularly, I find with smaller operators. I think some of the larger operators who have more employees, have compliance teams, especially if they're MSOs, they have to have better document control because they're sharing documents across the US. If you have any tips for smaller operators.
The best thing to do, everything you're saying is accurate. It's easier to start from the beginning. If you're going to build a house, the best thing to do is lay that foundation first, right?
Yeah.
And so to have all these systems, the document control, all the equipment maintenance, and we can go deeper into all the different systems into it. But if you lay that foundation in, the cool part about QMS is that you can build on top of it, right? Once you have that foundation, document control, and all these proper systems, it's easy to change, right? You've actually created a system that tracks changes, that is adaptable. And so the best advice is, if you haven't, do this at the beginning, because if you're already an existing business, what you need to give yourself some time and grace here, because, and we'll get into this because a lot of times QMS comes alongside GMP. We'll talk about that. This is not a quick shift of operations, right? What I like to do at minimum is going to take 3 or 4 months to really bring in all the systems and to really implement it and train your employees. But even it's more like 9 months or even longer, a year. Just give yourself a year and slowly start integrating this, because it's different. And again, it's a mind shift, like I said. And honestly, it takes a little time to really figure this out. This isn't common. Most businesses in this industry, they don't have quality experts, right?
Yeah.
And so give yourself some time.
I'm just thinking about, I know I can hear an operator in my ear right now because of my clients who I work with. They're just so bogged down. But I think if you can apply that kind of that 80-20 rule and just spend 20% a month, if you can, just doing a little bit each month to get organized and work on these things, a year from now, you can be in a better place with it. And of course, I know a lot of small operators and they're like, why would I do this? Why would I even waste my time or put the effort into this? But I look at the risk exposure as a circle of risk, and how big of a circle of risk are you creating? The goal is to really have a small circle of risk, and the more exposure, the larger that circle of risk is. And you're then risking your small business. And a lot of small businesses are self-funded, or the investors were family and friends that brought in money, and you're really putting all that at risk. It is really something to consider and to take serious. I wanted to talk about QMS versus compliance.
Oh, yeah.
And like, what's the difference? Because QMS, GMP, compliance, CDSAT tracking, it all just sounds like the same universe and the same word. And so many operators think that they're compliant. And how is compliance different from actually having a functional QMS system?
You got right into it. There's a lot of verbiage here that is confusing. You're right. So it depends on where you are, right, as an operator, because we all know there is a cannabis industry, but there's really a lot of small cannabis industries in each state. And depending on where you're operating, the state sets the compliance. And I know you and I talked about there's some additional federal rules that apply, like OSHA, and there's some EPA, worker protection standards, and universal waste that still apply, which is weird because it's still this federal confusion at this point. I think most of these businesses see, okay, I'm compliant because I'm following all the rules that apply to me. But if you go outside this country, or if you're in, let's say, Canada, that's shipping product international, they actually have to meet GMP requirements. And this is an important caveat here, is that all GMP compliance requires QMS, right? So if you ever go to a GMP, if you're let's say, you're in New York, they have requirements for extraction and manufacturing facilities that you have to get FDA GMP certified. And to get GMP certified, you have to have ISO 9001 certification either prior or you get it concurrently. So depending on the state, QMS might be a requirement. In Missouri, they have a QMS section in their rules, like a little different. They have different standards, including ISO 9001 that you can meet. So technically QMS, if I were an operator, I would consider QMS systems compliance. One, because this is self-regulation. Compliance system doesn't have to be the state or even federal rules. It could be your own internal governance. So the way I see it is all compliance, right? And making sure that all the employees are actually following the standards that we set as a country, and as an individual business. So that is in the weeds. But the way I see QMS too, I use this analogy a lot. QMS is really cool because it's like the big Russian nesting doll. You can stack all the smaller Russian nesting dolls in. So if you have a QMS, you can stack all your other complaints right into it, right? So the
Yeah.
good news about QMS is that when you create this foundation, regardless of the rules or criteria of the state or country or whatever you're doing, you can just slide those rules right in.
It sounds like it's the support system for compliance for the entire company from every aspect. And I always say compliance is woven into every single
Yes.
aspect of your business. And as an operator, every decision that you make, every choice in your business is related to compliance. If you decide, I want to buy an exit bag, you have to think about compliance. If you want to buy some packaging, you have to think about compliance. If you design your logo, you have to think about compliance. If you're doing a website, you have to think about compliance. When you're hiring employees, you have to think about compliance. There's labor laws you have to follow. So every decision in your business, including just your build out, there's codes and ordinances you have to follow from local municipality. So every decision has compliance woven into that the entire time that you're running the business, from application to operation to the entire time that you're going to own that business to when you sell it. Compliance is involved. So QMS is really, it's like the vortex that really manages it all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The hub of the
Yeah,
week.
the hub. That's a great way. The
Yeah,
hub. I
it
love
really
that.
is. And it should be, right? And this is why it's still fragmented out there, because they don't have that hub, right? And for most of these businesses, they don't have this singular system that manages all these other systems. And that's why I love it. Because again, I'm a systems guy, and this is a system that manages all these systems. And no, a lot of these businesses don't have, they should. It's going to make you better. It's going to make a clearer operation for the operators, for the leadership, insurers and lenders and financiers. This is the stuff that gives them comfort that things are happening the way it should happen. And
Yeah.
without it, again, it's just this chaos.
Well, and I think it inherently does a lot of really good things. One, it promotes a healthy workforce and work culture with all your employees because they're systems, just like if anyone has children, when you have structure, it helps your children thrive. The same thing goes for employees. When you have structure and systems in place and everyone's trained them properly, it really gives your staff a place to thrive in your business. And it also inherently creates that culture of compliance, right? Some facilities, they have really no compliance culture and they have no systems in place, or they implemented systems, but nobody's maintaining them or people aren't engaged. Oh, there's the shelf of SOP binders and there's 5 inches of dust on them and they haven't been updated for 5 years. My other question is, what's the difference between passing an inspection and actually having control of your operation?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, and a QMS with GMP, you can get certified, right? And that is a third party that comes in. It can be a lot, especially with GMP. It can be a multi-day event or where they come in and they go to deep dive. But the way I like to see it is that you can be certified or you can be compliant. Compliant is the most important in my opinion, right? Because certified, you're right. That's a snapshot in time and you got all the checks on the checklist. Right? You did what you needed to. And this is classic. It happens in all types of industries and businesses. They show up for that event, right? And they got all the things they need in place. And when that certifying body gives them that certification, they tend to sometimes forget about all the things that they need to continuously do.
Yeah.
And so right now, again, QMS is a requirement for all these states. It's a really smart thing to have. But you don't necessarily need to get certified, right? You can just bring in the system and actually having it and being compliant is way more important than the certification in my mind. If you do, again, if you want to sell internationally or eventually when we get to interstate, you will have to get QMS and GMP certified. So you will have to have it at that point. And it'll be good to be compliant beforehand, right? Because then you don't have to have that 4 to 12 month shift of getting to that compliant space. But again, I think the big difference for me is, are you actually implementing these systems and is it a part of your culture and what you're actually doing? Because again, I think a lot of people just like that checklist, they want to get through and they want to move on and do it the way they're doing. I've always done it. But the important thing is to utilize these systems in the way that they're supposed to, which is, again, is self-regulate. And sometimes it's hard for businesses to continuously do.
I wanted to ask like how QMS impacts insurance and financial outcomes. And I know
Different.
we talked a little bit earlier. I know you
Yeah.
did cover a little bit on the
Yeah.
insurance piece.
Yeah, this is big. I think one of the big pieces of why businesses should be doing QMS right now, even before it becomes a state/federal/international requirement, it is largely for the financing and insurance piece, because this is real money, right? This is
Underwriting.
underwriting. Yeah. So underwriting in insurance, what they look at is look at the systems, right? And this comes to the transparency. This is why QMS is so valuable, because people can see in your system in real time. What are you doing? What are the systems that you have? And are you maintaining them? Are you doing the things that you need to do on a regular basis? And with insurance, when they don't know something, they fill that in with premiums. And so what you're doing is you're alleviating their concerns, right? They have some very specific concerns depending on what type of insurance it is. Let's say property. There's a lot of different types of buyers out there that are happening, right? And if you can show them, look, no, I had the right systems in place, and I actually have a fire prevention plan, and I'm following the equipment maintenance, the approved maintenance plan of the manufacturer, and I'm recording it, and I'm doing all the things, and I have all the controls, then the insurers, that's great. Then you're a lower risk, and that will translate to better coverage, lower premiums, which is what everybody wants. And then on the financing side, this is the same thing, right? They don't know what they don't know. And a lot of times financing they have rates, right, attached to it. And so when they aren't sure of the risk, you're going to get the higher end of that financing rate. The APR is going to be higher. So this is important to, one, keep costs down. But on the other side of the financing is mergers and acquisitions. And same thing, buyers and sellers, they want to be able to have these systems defined, right? And a buyer is coming into the place without having a QMS system. Again, it's going to be more of a black box. And so they're not going to know everything that's happening. And they're just going to assume that there's the standard operation and the standard risk applied. That QMS defensibility shows you the facts, and then you can counter it with real life, what's going on around.
I would also say to the buyers out there, because the way the industry is, there's a lot of consolidation and these mergers and acquisitions.
Yeah.
People are buying up distressed assets.
Yeah.
As a buyer, you should be looking at all these things too. And,
Yeah.
you know, do they have any QMS? And is that something that you're going to have to build out yourself when you come
Exactly.
in? That could affect the pricing. Besides a financial audit, you should be doing a compliance and quality assurance audit before you buy a license or cannabis operations to use at negotiating the price of what you're going to be paying. Also, too, what I'm seeing associated with the lending and where it's heading is they're coming up with this risk score in cannabis right now. And I think that's going to be the future of lending. Even when it opens up, if we get rescheduled or descheduled, I don't think the risk regarding lending is going to go away, because the cannabis industry will always be high risk, like liquor stores and pawn shops. Their risk have never changed. They're still considered a high risk industry. I don't think because we get rescheduled or descheduled that cannabis risk is going to lower. I think the risk will always be a high risk industry. No matter how regulated that we are, you will have a compliance or a risk score attached to your business, depending on where you're at with these things that we're talking about.
Yeah, no, agree. Yep, that's where it's headed.
I want to talk about operational gaps and like bridging the QMS and risk. What are the first red flags that tell you that an operator doesn't have control of their operation?
Document control, again, that's the first indicator. Do you even have a sense of what a quality management system is? And like I said, for the most part, that is lacking. So document control, it's not super complex. It's just a lot of work. When you have more and more documents, it just takes a lot more time to maintain, to build these systems and maintain it. But that's the first big red flag, is document control. We talked a little bit about equipment maintenance. That's another one.
I think that's a big one.
It's a big one. Some businesses, for the most part, that's where A lot of cannabis businesses are doing it. It's hard to say is the majority or not, but a significant amount of these businesses are doing that. I'm also looking at traceability, of course, inventory. Are you following the state inventory rules? Like that's the big one. But traceability goes even beyond that. You're tracing your inputs, right? So all the products that you receive that are coming into your business, cannabis or raw materials that you're putting in to your business, how are you tracking that? That's a big piece that I think a lot of businesses are missing as well. Maintaining good training matrices is important as well. A lot of businesses don't track that well. Then another foundational piece is CAPA.
Yeah.
And actually on top of that is customer complaints, right? That's another big system. Are you tracking customer complaints? Is there a real system to handle that, especially adverse effect? You have to have an adverse effect process in place, like potentially as a voluntary recall. And then that would lead into a CAPA, which for the listeners is a corrective and preventative action. The corrective action is what you do now. Let's say there's an adverse effect. The corrective action is to put all of that product from that same batch or lot into quarantine, potentially recall it if it's a real contamination event. The preventative action would put controls in place so it doesn't happen again in the future. But those CAPAs are another big piece that businesses aren't really adopting. There's quite a bit of states that require CAPAs in certain scenarios when violations happen. But as a whole, businesses aren't really adopting it. But this is the check and act part, right? Where of the ISO 9001 is, okay, something happened that was outside of our acceptable thresholds, and what are you going to do about it? And so tracking that is exceedingly important in these systems. And yeah, document
Yeah.
control, track and trace, equipment maintenance, training, and CAPAs. Those are
Colorado, we use CAPA. It's a requirement. And I've seen CAPA is not just for when a recall happens or an adverse event reaction to a product. A lot of times people think it's only tied to that. I've actually seen the regulators. Alex and I did a project where we were helping someone through mitigation after an investigation, and they had messed up some of their testing procedures. And the CAPA, you're doing the investigation, it's the 5 whys, and it gets you to your next why.
well,
And
root
then
cause. Yeah.
yeah, and then you get down to the root cause, which is why it happened. And then the preventative action, like Alex talked about, is okay, we created a new SOP to make sure that this doesn't happen again, and that's how we fix it. So we've had to do CAPAs where our clients have had to turn that CAPA report into the regulators showing A, here's our CAPA report, and B, here's our new SOP. And we're seeing this more and more across the states. It could also be underage sales for a dispensary. If you don't think dispensaries are prone to CAPAs, it's just not true. If you get in trouble for underage sales, essentially you'd have to figure out where was the breakdown. Was it training? Were you lacking something in your SOP? Where did the mistake happen? And then you would have to make that correction and send that CAPA report to the regulators. So it's for every license type, whether you're micro, social equity, standard commercial license, transporter, dispensary. It's just not manufacturing and cultivation facilities that are subject to CAPA. So I want to widen everyone's perspectives when it comes to CAPA.
What I like to describe is that QMS, you qualify everything. What's acceptable, right? Like what's quality equipment? What's quality process? What's a quality facility? What's a quality employee, right? And so these businesses get to make that decision. What is quality, right? And when something happens that's outside that definition, that triggers a deviation, which also makes you look at, okay, we didn't do what we wanted to do. And does that require us to take action? Sometimes it's a thing that just happens, things happen, and it doesn't require capital. But for a significant amount of things that go wrong, you should be correcting the immediate issue and then planning to prevent that from happening. And it can happen to all types of employees, equipment maintenance, cleaning issues, right? It can be you didn't check the ID right. It can be at every level of employment and employer, all the way up to leadership, right?
I think between the document piece that you're talking about, and also I feel like training is a big,
Big
and
gap.
every state is different. We have some states where I was reading have requirements where employees have to get 20 hours of training a year. In some states, it's 2. In places like Colorado, we don't really have really mandatory training other than like the test batch collector training, which that could be changing here in Colorado, the way that testing is done. In other states, all bud tenders have to be responsible vendor trained. Some states I've even seen cultivation responsible vendor, manufacturing responsible vendor. I believe that's in Maryland, where that's all mandatory, which I believe that creates a lot of gaps when there's not mandatory training requirements. In the states, I feel like that do have the mandatory requirements. I think it helps shrink that gap a little bit. I kind of want to tackle GMP and cannabis and kind of the reality versus hype. GMP, I'd say it's a buzzword right now in the cannabis industry, and there's a lot. It's a big time buzzword, and I'm sure it's a buzzword globally over in the EU. We hear a lot of people talking about it globally.
Yep.
So, what does GMP ready actually mean in cannabis today?
GMP ready, that means being, again, back to the certification versus compliant, is being GMP compliant, which is good manufacturing practices. And each country has their own. So there's Canadian, there's EU. GMP is really important, especially on international trade. So if you sell across borders, you have to meet the exporters and importers requirements, right? And so that's largely what it means. In this country, the GMP that actually it's important, there's a lot of GMP. That's the confusing thing, is that there's different businesses out there that create their own GMP standards, which are good practices, right? Smart business, good practices. I'll never want to talk down any of those, but some of them don't have value, right? Like it's not a compliant requirement or a compliance requirement, but the ones that matter are the FDA. In agriculture, there's what's called good agriculture and collection practices. And some people confuse that for GMP, but in this country, we have the FDA. There's 3 basic GMP categories. You have food GMP, so manufacturing food, you have dietary supplements, and then you have pharmaceutical.
Yeah.
And it tiers up the requirements. And so there's higher level of requirements along that. In GMP, there's only one state that I'm aware of, New York, that actually requires this. And I think they're allowing a lot of these operators to kick the can down the road. So they're in New York, they say if you have a food manufacturer, you have to have food GMP. If you're an extractor, you have to have dietary supplement. And so that's a very specific set of requirements. What I touched on earlier is that you have to have QMS. You have to have ISO 9001 in place, either prior or concurrent. If you're going for the certification, they're going to look at, do you have that? And you're going to get judged on that. So GMP really, again, it's like kind of back to that Russian destiny doll thing. The GMP goes inside the QMS, right? And so you get the QMS, you get that foundation. GMP ready means to me that you're compliant, that you actually have a QMS and you're meeting these criteria. Most businesses honestly are not there. But I do want to mention, this is what we were actually talking about earlier before we got on, is that there is something went way under the radar, and is with the president's executive orders. What was it?
Regarding psychedelics or?
No, it was the prior one. It was the one that expedited the Schedule 3.
Oh, okay.
Which as of now still hasn't been expedited.
CBD and Medicare?
Yeah, exactly. At the tail end of that. So it was like the big part of it was like, expedite the Schedule 3 process. And at the tail end is and then create, and of course I'm
generalizing.
I'm not saying the exact verbiage here, but it was something to the effect of Medicare pay for some of these CBD supplements for the people on Medicare. And the OMB, which is Office of Management and Budget, they just 2 weeks ago had the first meeting with the FDA, and they just set the guidelines that created an opportunity. It's going to be a pilot program where they're going to bring in CBD products. And what they said in there is that they got to meet dietary supplement requirements.
Yeah.
So this is a big opportunity, I think, for a lot of cannabis businesses, especially hemp businesses. And so if you want to be able to sell your CBD products through Medicare, you better get QMS and GMP stats, because that's the only way you're going to be able to take advantage of that opportunity.
It gives you a competitive advantage, which I want to talk about on the future of
Yeah.
QMS and cannabis. And I want to add this piece. We talked about EU GMP, right?
Mhm.
Globally. And if you're in Canada and you're shipping to Germany, which is a market that's starting to get a little hot over there,
Yeah.
you have to have a EU GMP system in place for people receiving product. Think about the United States. Now, I don't think we're going to be doing a lot of trade overseas, but I do see us doing national trade. Let's just say the future of cannabis, we're eventually going to be descheduled. Even if we get rescheduled, eventually the future of cannabis is descheduling. And what that's going to mean is that on a national level, there's going to be national trade. And you can't just ship something, right? You're going to have a QMS in order for you to ship in compliance regulated cannabis if you're going to be shipping to Texas or New York from Colorado and all these things. And that's where it's heading, like what's happening overseas in the global market now with all the product from Canada going into all these smaller EU markets. Specifically, I think most of it's going to Germany, right, Alex?
They're a big buyer. Yeah.
And I
Canada's.
think some of it's coming from Africa into Germany as well. But I think right now Germany is the biggest buyer in the market
We
right
are.
now.
Yeah.
And obviously some of these other places in the EU are going to start opening up. But I think on our call today, they talked about how Germany is embracing more of the adult use market, but pretty much everywhere else globally is medical right now, which medical is going to have pharmaceutical standards applied to it.
Exactly. I think regardless, the way I see QMS and GMP, this is future proofing your business. If you want to compete globally, nationally, like you said, interstate commerce, this is the way it's going to happen. If you wait for the state or to get descheduled and if then for them to set these things, you're going to be far behind. And if you really want to compete in this space, these are the standards you need to adopt.
Yeah, I think that's what we have listed where you see QMS and operational standards heading in the next 3 to 5 years. All the things that we just talked about, like
Yeah.
reiterating Alex with standardization, data driven risk scoring, which we talked around that on the financial side and the compliance side, the
Yeah.
integration with insurance and lending,
Yeah.
and then software, which I love. You call it ops intelligence, which I love that name for that.
Yes, that's a little self plug here.
I know.
I do support businesses, and the way I see it is the 3-tier kind of support that these businesses have. They need help designing and implementing these systems, and then there's compliance software systems, which I can help with as well. What these businesses need long term is they need a quality and risk expert on the team. But until then, they're going to need to basically bring in some support, which again is one of the things that I can do. But those are the areas that these businesses really need help with. And all those areas, you're exactly right. This is where it's going. The next level maturity.
Yeah.
This is the next step in this industry. And to be honest with you, I'm excited for it. And as a consumer, it's like this can't happen soon enough because what I want is I want the same trust that when I open a consumer packaged good like Fig Newtons or something, that I trust that when I open that Fig Newton's going to be safe for me to eat. I just don't even
Yeah.
think about it. But knowing what I know in cannabis, cannabis isn't as safe as those as of now because of the lack of these systems and controls in place. And what I want is the average consumer and myself to trust when I go buy that cannabis that it has all those controls in place that I know it's going to be safe.
We have consumption that has many ways it's delivered. If you think about one, you're eating something, so you're consuming it, but also too the vaporizing, vape pen products. There's just a lot of control that needs to happen when you come to vaporized delivery devices.
Testing and the inputs, but you're exactly right. That is where contamination can come in because there was some cheap product from a country that didn't do their own testing on it.
Well, not even cheap product, but it also can be the cheap equipment. Because what I have found is if they're buying some of the carts, the vaporizer devices that they're filling with the product, that the plastic or the metals is leaking into the cannabis oil, which is causing contamination. You have to have processes with your buying of equipment that you're using to create your product. For rolling papers and cones can have additives that cause you to fail testing, not in the cannabis product, but it could be in the actual paper. If you're not doing some research and development testing on your cones
Yeah.
and the different equipment that you're ordering, it can cause all kinds of contamination and testing failures. And there's a lot to think about. And wrapping up, is there any final last words you want to leave listeners with today?
I think we flooded them with the fire hose, but no, I
We
think
did.
it's what I want to tell them, even though it's a lot of stuff that I think maybe some people are maybe not as comfortable with, that, oh, a lot of people come into the cannabis space and this is their passion project and they know the processes, but a lot of this seems very foreign and esoteric to them.
Yeah.
This is rocket science, right? The good news is that these are just basic systems that, even though there's complexity throughout all these systems, each individual system itself isn't tremendously complex. This doesn't have to be hard. Is there attention and awareness and energy involved in this? Yes. But everything worth anything requires hard work. And that's what
Yeah.
this is. You put hard work in, and be honest with you, that's what it requires. If you want to succeed in this space, you're going to have to work hard and you're going to have to outcompete the others. And these are the systems to help you do that.
Yeah, and we're the cannabis industry, we are still in infancy. We are still a new industry, even though that some of us might be 17 to 20 plus years in. We're still pretty young. You have to remember that. And what we are today is not who we're going to be tomorrow. That's all going to change. And like my awesome mentor told me, I don't know, 11 years ago when I was starting my business, he said, Jenny, how do you digest or eat an elephant in the room? And I said, I have no idea. And he said, one piece at a time. And that's how I've always applied that to my business, to compliance, to regulations. Anything that's really big and overwhelming, you break it down into pieces, into sections, and that's how you digest it so you don't get overwhelmed. And, anyways, hopefully, this is really helpful for anyone that's listening or thinking about doing QMS in the future in their business, or maybe you're starting on it now. You can always reach out to us if you have questions. And once again, I appreciate you, Alex, being on here and always coming in and dropping knowledge. I know you got some fans out there that love listening to you when you come on. So I appreciate you. And for those who want to stream the podcast, we are available on Spotify and Apple and wherever you like to listen. You can go check out my YouTube channel, which is at Under the Microscope with Jenny, and watch us on videos for those who like to watch. Thanks again, everyone. And thank you, Alex, for being here.